It began when Ethan and Marissa Clay moved from Chicago to Los Angeles in the fall of 2022. They weren't actors or musicians, just an architect and a freelance photo editor looking to start over. Ethan had landed a job with a mid-sized firm in West Hollywood, and Marissa was hoping the light and color of California would reignite her creativity. They didn't come looking for a celebrity home, but one found them. It was the real estate agent who mentioned it quietly, almost as a warning. "This is the old James Dean house," she said as she unlocked the iron gate. "He lived here just before filming Rebel Without a Cause. Rented it, only for a few months, but people remember." The house stood near the base of the Hollywood Hills, on a narrow slope off Vine Street. Spanish-style stucco, ivy crawling up the outer walls, the paint gently flaking. It wasn't grand, but it had character-arched windows, a balcony that looked over the city, and a sunken living room with dark wood beams. Ethan fell in love with it immediately. Marissa hesitated. She didn't believe in hauntings, but there was something about the air inside thick, heavy, like a held breath. Still, they signed the papers. The price was strangely low for the area. They moved in on a Tuesday. The movers left before sundown, and Marissa sat on the living room floor, surrounded by unopened boxes, watching the light stretch across the terracotta tiles. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. "I keep hearing the front gate open," he said. "It's probably nothing. Street cats. Wind." But it wasn't the wind. In the mornings, Marissa found cigarette ashes on the porch. Neither of them smoked. There was no smell, just the ashes and the faintest trace of leather and motor oil in the air, like someone had walked through a garage just moments before. The old radio built into the kitchen wall, dead for decades, crackled once, faintly, during a thunderless night. By the second week, Marissa started noticing changes in her photos. She'd be editing shots she took in downtown LA, and every so often, in a window or mirror, a blur of a figure would appear, tall, slim, always looking away. She told herself it was just software glitches. The hallway upstairs had an antique mirror nailed into the wall. They hadn't put it there, it came with the house. Marissa avoided it at first. She didn't know why. Something about the way it leaned, like it didn't belong. One night, while brushing her teeth, she glanced into it and froze. There was a man standing at the end of the hall. She turned, heart pounding, but no one was there. When she looked back into the mirror, the figure was gone. She described him to Ethan. Leather jacket, jeans, dark hair, sad eyes. Ethan laughed it off. "So basically James Dean." Marissa didn't laugh. From then on, the figure started appearing more. Never in the room directly, only in reflections, windows, the mirror, even the television screen. Always watching, never moving. One night, Ethan woke to the sound of tires skidding and a metallic crunch. He rushed out of bed, heart racing, but the street was empty. A month into their stay, a man knocked on their door. He was older, dressed in a retro bowling shirt, his arms full of yellowed manila folders. "You live here now?" he asked Ethan. "I used to live next door, back in the 70s. Ethan invited him in. The man introduced himself as Carl. "James Dean used to stay here, before he got that Porsche. The one he died in. He was different here. Restless. Couldn't sit still. Used to come out on that balcony and stare down the hill like he was trying to outrun something." Carl opened a folder. Inside were old black and white photos. One showed the very same hallway mirror. Another, taken from the street, showed someone standing on the balcony, just a blur, but unmistakably Dean. "He died young. Too fast. I always wondered if he left something behind." When Ethan asked why he was bringing this up now, Carl shrugged. "I was driving down Vine. Just felt something. Like he wanted someone to remember." That night, the mirror cracked just a hairline, running top to bottom, like a lightning scar. Marissa tried to take a photo of it, but every picture came out pitch black. By early 2023, Marissa had stopped editing entirely. She couldn't bring herself to look at screens anymore. Every image showed the same thing, someone watching her. Ethan found her one morning on the floor of the hallway, staring at the mirror. Her eyes were wide, unblinking. "He's waiting," she whispered. He doesn't know he's dead. Ethan took a leave of absence from work, and they left the house in February. They tried to sell it, but buyers backed out sometimes after just one visit. One woman claimed she saw someone in the kitchen lighting a cigarette, even though the house was empty. Eventually, the Clays walked away, abandoned the mortgage. The house sat vacant for months. Sometimes, people say they see someone standing on the balcony late at night. A man in a leather jacket, staring out toward the hills, waiting for a car that never comes. They say if you walk by the house and glance into the old living room window, you might catch a glimpse not of James Dean's ghost exactly, but of something caught between memory and time. A presence that never got its final scene. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. After Ethan and Marissa Clay vanished from the title, the property on Vine Street remained in legal limbo. The cracked mirror in the hallway remained untouched. The ivy grew thicker around the balcony rails, and the mailbox rusted to the point where even the metal began to flake like peeling paint. For nearly 7 months, the house waited. In August of 2023, it found new occupants. They were an older couple, this time Noel and Helen Fields. Recently retired, with white-gray hair and matching Prius hybrids, they came to California from New Jersey with dreams of sunshine and jazz nights in the city. They had no children, just each other, and were quietly seeking a place to grow old with grace. They saw the house during an overcast afternoon, the kind of rare, colorless sky Los Angeles only wore when something was off. Their realtor, a nervous man in his 30s with a voice too high for his frame, mentioned the price several times before even unlocking the door. Helen noticed the air first. It feels muffled, she said, like how it feels inside a church when no one's praying. Noel thought it was charming in a decaying sort of way. The Spanish tile, the thick, ornate doors, the built-in niches on the hallway wall that once held candles. We can fix it up, he said. It just needs some warmth. They moved in a week later. The Clays had left some furniture behind, too much to bother shipping, and the Fields didn't mind. Helen liked the velvet couch in the living room. Even though the fabric smelled faintly of cologne and dust, they kept the mirror. They didn't think twice about it. In the second week, Noel began hearing footsteps overhead. Always around 2 a.m., always in the same pattern, slow, steady, from the back bedroom to the hallway, then silence. He told Helen, but she shrugged. Maybe the floor's just shifting. But he started leaving a glass of water on his nightstand before bed, and by morning it would always be empty. One night, when he got up to refill it, he passed the hallway mirror and saw a flicker like headlights skimming across glass. The house faced the hills. No headlights should have reached that far inside. Helen began having dreams. In one of them, she stood on the balcony in a leather jacket that wasn't hers, holding a cigarette she never smoked, staring down into the winding streets of Los Angeles. A voice low, like gravel in a coffee can, kept saying, "You're not supposed to be here." But when she turned around, there was no one behind her. Each time she woke up, the bedsheets were damp with sweat, and her left wrist ached as if she'd been holding something too tightly. By the end of September, their dog Baxter, a 10-year-old terrier, refused to go near the hallway. He'd sit at the edge of the kitchen tiles, staring down the corridor with his ears flat and his tail tucked between his legs. Noel and Helen thought he was sick. They took him to the vet. Nothing was wrong. On October 3rd, Noel walked into the den and stopped cold. A vinyl record was spinning slowly on the old player, one they had never used. Played Nature Boy by Nat King Cole. Dust danced in the beam of afternoon light. The record spun without power. The cord was still unplugged. He didn't tell Helen. That night, he sat at the kitchen table long after she'd gone to bed, sipping warm gin from a chipped glass, staring out the window. Just before midnight, he saw it, movement on the balcony. A figure, arms folded against the rail, head down. For a full 30 seconds, Noel watched the man. No shadow, no sound. The man never looked up. But Noel said he didn't need to. He already knew the face. By mid-October, Helen stopped going upstairs entirely. She began to complain that the house made her forget things. She would stand in the kitchen, holding a spoon, and not remember what she was cooking. She'd turn off the lights and find them on again minutes later. She lost her phone, then her keys, then £3 without trying. Sometimes she would sit in the sunroom and whisper to someone who wasn't there. "He just wants to be remembered," she told Noelle one night, her eyes glassy. "He just wants the moment before the crash to stop." Noelle didn't answer. He was beginning to see things in the mirror. Not faces, fragments. The back of a head. A hand reaching for the edge of the frame. Reflections that didn't belong to either of them. On Halloween morning, Helen opened an envelope on the front porch. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Black and white. Faded around the edges. It showed this house, but long before they bought it. No ivy. No fence. Just the clean bones of the stucco and tile, the windows still clear. On the balcony stood a man. Head turned. Leather jacket. Cigarette in hand. Across the bottom, in red ink, someone had written, "He's still waiting for the green light." Helen didn't speak for the rest of the day. That night, Noelle found her sitting in the hallway in front of the mirror. Legs crossed, eyes fixed on the crack running through it. She looked like a child waiting to be picked up from school. She whispered, "He doesn't know it's over." The days that followed moved like underwater hours. Noelle began waking at 3:27 every morning. Never 3:26. Never 3:28. Always 3:27. At first, it was the sound of tires on gravel, sharp, grinding, distant. But there was no gravel on their street, just old pavement and buckling concrete. Then it was the voice, low, quiet, always coming from the hallway. He never made out what it said, only the tone. Exhausted, flat, masculine. Not angry, not threatening, just tired. Like someone who had rehearsed the same line too many times. The mirror, meanwhile, deepened. That's the only word Noelle could use. It wasn't a trick of shadow or light. It was as if the glass began to stretch inward, not physically, but optically, like looking through a lens that pulled the world on the other side further and further away. Sometimes, when he glanced at it too quickly, he saw what looked like the living room behind him, but not as it was. The furniture in the reflection was different. Older. Boxier. Faint outlines of ashtrays and a standing lamp they never owned. The color palette was pale, washed in a yellow-gray hue as if someone had wiped a 1950s film still across the glass. And once, when Helen was outside pruning the overgrown jasmine near the fence, he walked past the mirror and saw her standing next to him in the reflection. Only, she was wearing a silk scarf, holding a cigarette, her hair done up like a starlet. And she was younger, so much younger. He turned to speak to her, but the hallway was empty. One afternoon in November, Helen drove out alone. Noelle stood on the balcony, watching her Prius disappear into the winding slope. The city below was smeared in haze, like a memory in slow erasure. For a moment, he saw the city as it had once been. Neon signs glowing faintly even in daylight, the occasional distant clatter of a streetcar, the taste of cold coffee and exhaust. That's when he noticed the man again. Not clearly, but just enough. Standing across the street near the edge of a hedge, one foot propped against a low wall, arms folded. Looking at the house. Noelle didn't wave. He didn't shout. He just went back inside and locked the door. In a drawer behind the built-in bookshelf, Helen found an old canister wrapped in wax paper. She hadn't been searching. She'd simply been drawn to it like a whispered suggestion from the walls. Inside, a roll of 16mm film. There were no labels, no dates, just brittle celluloid. They took it to a film transfer service in Burbank. The man who received it, a technician named Sam, called back 3 days later. "What kind of project is this?" he asked cautiously. "Where did you find it?" Helen said it came with the house. He was silent for a moment before replying, "I'll send you the digitized file tomorrow, but I don't think this was meant to be seen." When the file arrived, Noelle and Helen watched it late at night, on Helen's laptop, with the lights off. The footage was raw, handheld, shaky. It showed a man, James Dean, unmistakably in the hallway of their house, walking toward the mirror. No music, no dialogue, just the ambient hum of the room. He stops, stares into the glass, and then speaks. Only there's no sound. His lips move, but the voice never arrives. He steps closer. The camera shakes. Then, in a single jarring frame, his face distorts not in a grotesque way, but as if the film had warped under heat. The final image is of him touching the mirror. His fingers fade through the glass. Then, static. Helen didn't speak for a long time. Noelle closed the laptop. Neither of them slept that night. As December crept in, the house began to speak louder. Late at night, radios turned on without power, their static oddly rhythmic like an engine idling in place. The sound of leather creaking, of lighters being flicked open and shut, started coming from the far end of the hallway. And the mirror, now visibly more cracked, with webbing lines blooming from the original fracture, began to hum faintly. A sound you didn't notice until it stopped. A sound that wasn't quite real. Helen stopped leaving the house entirely. She wore vintage cardigans every day now, even when it was warm. Her hair was always tied back, and she started wearing soft lipstick again, peach, the kind her mother used to wear in old photographs. One morning, Noelle found her carefully placing a folded scarf inside the freezer. He asked why. She smiled, distant. "To keep it fresh," she said, as if he should understand. Noelle stood in the doorway and felt it. The air around her had changed. It wasn't haunted, not in the traditional sense. It was imprinted. She was becoming part of something she couldn't name. They no longer kept clocks in the house. Time had become unreliable. One moment it would be 10:15, the next 2:45. The sky outside rarely matched the hour. Sometimes dusk lingered for hours. Other times morning came and went in a flash of white sky and birds that never landed. Noelle started keeping a notebook. Inside it, he wrote simple things: what he ate, what he wore, where he found Helen standing. But the entries began to repeat, word for word. He turned to a fresh page and saw yesterday's handwriting already written, in ink slightly older than the pen in his hand. On the morning of December 19th, Helen sat at the base of the mirror again. This time, she placed a photograph on the floor in front of her, a headshot of James Dean she'd cut from an old Life magazine. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lined the corners to the grout in the tiles. "Tell me where you are," she whispered. "Tell me where it ends." Noelle, watching from the kitchen, didn't interrupt her, because he, too, had begun to wonder. What if James Dean never left this house? What if, in the final seconds before the crash, before the headlights collided with the horizon, something broke? Not time, not memory, something older, something deeper. A reel of life paused in mid-frame, a soul that never got its final cue. September 30th. A heavy, unmoving sky hung over Los Angeles, colorless as cement. The sun never quite pierced through the gauze of clouds, and the wind carried a scent Noelle hadn't smelled since they first arrived: motor oil, leather, burnt rubber faint in the corners of the air. Neither he nor Helen spoke of what day it was, but both knew. It had been exactly 68 years since James Dean's death. The house seemed to know it too. At 5:45 p.m., the hallway lights flickered once sharp and deliberate, and the radio in the living room turned on by itself. It wasn't on a station. It just hummed softly, like static filtered through memory. Helen was in her old room, the one she never used anymore except to stand in front of the vanity. She was wearing a sleeveless ivory blouse, a dark skirt, and soft, curled waves in her hair. She had powdered her face, drawn her lips with careful precision, and pinned a small brooch to her collar. It was shaped like a star. She looked like someone waiting for a ride that never came. Noelle stood by the kitchen window, watching the narrow road below. The street remained empty, and then came the engine. Low, throaty, climbing from the hills like a ghost dragging metal behind it. Not a modern engine. It had an old American muscle, the kind of growl that used to make heads turn on Melrose Avenue. It crept closer, until Noelle felt the vibrations in his teeth. He stepped out onto the front porch, breath caught in his chest. A silver Porsche 550 Spider glided past the house. No driver, no shadow behind the wheel, just a gleaming, untouched machine that didn't disturb a single fallen leaf as it passed. The license plate read 130, the same as Dean's car, the one he crashed near Sherman. Noelle watched it curve out of sight down Vine Street until the sound faded completely. And then silence. Thick, almost viscous, the kind of silence that pressed into the ears. He turned back toward the house and saw Helen standing behind the hallway window, eyes glassy, her lips barely moving. She mouthed a name. Jimmy. It happened just after midnight. A single pop like a knuckle cracking. Then a long, splitting side glass giving up after decades of tension. The mirror broke. Not in a violent shatter, not in an explosive crash. It fractured in silence. Dozens of fine, meandering lines rippled outward from the center, like veins spreading across a frozen lake. Every crack glowed faintly in the moonlight, and in the reflection just for a moment Noelle saw it all. Not their hallway, but the house as it had been in 1955. Clean walls, fresh paint, no shadows in the corners. A man in a white undershirt leaning against the doorframe, hair tousled, cigarette smoldering in his hand, his eyes searching, as if scanning for someone who never walked through the door. And in the reflection beside him, Helen, younger, smiling faintly, dressed for a night out. Their hands almost touched. Almost. Then the light shifted, and it was gone. They never replaced the mirror. They left it exactly as it was, cracked, quiet, hollow. A relic. Helen stopped doing her hair, stopped wearing her vintage clothes. She spent most mornings on the balcony now, drinking coffee and looking out at the hills with an expression that was neither sad nor content, just still. Noelle kept his notebook closed. Some nights he still hears the car. Just once. Just for a second. Far down the canyon road. A phantom machine returning to a place it never should have left. And on quiet evenings, when the wind shifts, the house smells faintly of old leather, movie lights, and a nervous kind of hope. The kind people carry just before something irreversible happens. Real estate records are vague. The Clays were relocated. The fields faded. The mirror remains. Still cracked. Still there. And if you ever visit the corner of Vine Street and de Longpre Avenue, look closely into the hallway glass. Sometimes it shows you what you missed. Sometimes it shows you what he did. But only if you're alone. Only if you're quiet. And only if you're waiting, like he was, still is, forever caught in the last moment before the green light. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.